You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 22, The Perfect Metaphor. Well, I'm Bruce Philp, and thanks for joining me. Well, if you're listening to this, chances are you care a lot about motorcycles. But have you ever wondered if the rest of the world should too? Well, I certainly think so, and so does my next guest. I've just never been quite sure why. Well, in a moment, you'll hear us try to figure that out. The answer won't surprise you, but it comes with a challenge for everyone who loves life on two wheels. We'll get to that shortly. But first, no episode would be complete without a couple of important shout-outs. First of all, hello again to my friends at Eat, Sleep, Ride. Well, this is a non-commercial podcast, but I like to promote them partly because the founders are friends of mine, and also because I believe in what they're doing. Eat, Sleep, Ride is based on the idea that the key to motorcycle safety is community, and you can be part of it with their free mobile app. I use mine to record rides, share routes, and connect with other riders, and I'm a big fan of the optional crash light feature, which can detect a crash and instantly send your location information to someone who can help. Joining the Eat, Sleep, Ride community is as easy as downloading the app from your preferred app store, and you should check it out. And thanks as always for your recent ratings and reviews, and for the supportive emails and Instagram messages, which really keep me inspired. Over the last month, I've heard from a few listeners who wanted to share their stories after my conversation with Dr. Mark Barnes, and I want to say a special thanks to them, both for their honesty and because it's such a pleasure to pass that appreciation on to my guests. Mark was thrilled to know that he'd had an impact. And speaking of impact, by the time you hear this podcast will have surpassed 100,000 downloads, which is kind of amazing for fewer than 24 episodes. Thanks for staying with me and for putting up with my unpredictable schedule. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's go. So, riding season is slowly winding down around here, although we're still hoping we can squeeze a few more weeks in before the snow flies again. It's a beautiful time to ride, just throttle back and take in the scenery and reflect. Well, this season was a bit of a mixed bag for me. On the one hand, I felt a little bit cursed. We got off to a very late start thanks to a wet, cold spring. I lost even more time to an injury and then to a 4-week cold, if you can imagine. And maybe worst of all, my favorite bike, my Triumph Scrambler, was out of commission for almost 2 months, waiting for parts for a busted transmission. On the other hand, though, I got to do some motorcycle things this year that I'd never done before, which I always think is the sign of a great season. I had my first experience with moto camping. I got introduced to the secret madness of scootering. There may be an episode in that. I took a trip to Nova Scotia for some blissful late summer riding with an old friend, and I got my first chance to mentor a new rider. And that last one was kind of the inspiration for this episode. In one sense, the experience of encouraging this new rider was pretty straightforward. This guy was young, but not too young, level-headed and focused, and had already done a lot of the right things, including signing up for rider training, investing in protective gear, and setting his sights on a sensible bike. All I really had to offer was some advice about surviving his training weekend, along with some enjoyable, to me at least, exchanges about the bikes and features he might consider. It was the kind of role I think any of us would enjoy. No rider I've ever met didn't like talking about motorcycles, or being the uncontested expert on the subject for once. But there was a catch. And the catch was that this young man's parents are dear friends of ours. And although they were great about it all and expressed nothing but appreciation that I could help him out, well, it still felt weird to me. It's one thing to help a new rider get started. It's another to look that new rider's mom in the eye and promise her this is going to be a good thing, much less a cause for celebration. And yet, I mostly think it is. The author H.G. Wells once wrote, "Every time I see an adult on a bicycle, I no longer despair for the future of the human race." And that's pretty much how I feel when I see anyone on a motorcycle. Even acknowledging the danger involved in doing this, if someone I care about takes up riding, well, I have this strong feeling that not only will it enrich their lives, but it will somehow, in some small way, make the world a better place too. Well, I get that normal people might think that sounds crazy, but I think it's how a lot of us feel. I'm just not entirely sure why, and that seemed worth talking about. Who to have that conversation with was a much easier question to answer. Robert Pandya first appeared on my radar screen about 2 years ago with the launch of an industry advocacy initiative called Give a Shift. Fresh out of a 10-year relationship with Victory and then Indian Motorcycle, Pandya had strong feelings about what the future might hold for motorcycling and what the industry ought to do about it, and he was willing to tell anyone who would listen. Since then, he hasn't let up, making his point with a combination of gloves-off commentary and a list of passion projects designed to put as many people on two wheels as humanly possible. Anyone that dedicated to saving motorcycling must have a reason, and Robert Pandya was more than willing to share his. I reached him at his home in Georgetown, Texas. Hey, Robert, it's great to be finally speaking to you in person. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
No, not at all. It's I've been excited to talk to you because we actually connected a couple of years ago, but only by email. And I guess we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But I've been following your shenanigans pretty closely since then, and in a sense, your sense of mission is the reason why we're talking today. So I'm excited to kind of get into it. Why don't we start by giving people a proper introduction to who you are? So you and I connected through an initiative called Give a Shift, which I imagine we'll talk about shortly. But there's been a lot more to your life with motorcycles, right? Can you give us a sketch of your story?
Yeah, sure. It actually started. The first time I was really conscious of a motorcycle is I was almost unconscious on a motorcycle when I rode a Cushman or a Briggs & Stratton engine scooter through a bush and into the side of the house. And then when I got up from that, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And that, I was hooked at that point. Right.
Right.
And it was years and years later that I finally got a ride on a proper motorcycle. And then I remember being a little kid on vacation out in California and seeing a very sort of traditional biker looking guy, leather vest and the whole bit. And he was on this, what I know now is like a old Harley hand shift thing. And it was just shaking and making all this noise. And I knew that my mom and dad were super annoyed by this guy and they wouldn't make eye contact with him. So I was immediately intrigued. Right. and that set the hook pretty deep. And that was in front of Mann's Chinese Theater. I know exactly where it was. And then from that point on, I was just trying to incorporate motorcycles into my life. And I had a little Suzuki GN 250, little single cylinder air cooled drum brake turd. And that was my bike that got me around after high school. And I started a photography career and then got hired sort of out of the blue by a friend of mine, Bill Stone, for Aprilia Motorcycles. And that was roughly 23 years ago. I thought I would do it for about a year and then get back into my photography work. And it turned into a right angle on my career. And all of a sudden I'm a motorcycle marketer who enjoys photography instead of a photographer who enjoys the motorcycle.
Right.
So, and then in that path I've worked with a few different brands, Aprilia, as I mentioned, Moto Guzzi, Kymco, Buell, all on different, smaller projects. I was with Aprilia and then the Piaggio group for 10 years in a row. And then soon after that, I was with, I represented Victory Motorcycles for a decade, with a 3-year overlap on Indian motorcycles.
Right.
And here I am today. in my living room.
still doing it, and you've got more irons in the fire than that, right? I think we, as I mentioned earlier, we connected on Give a Shift. I think you're involved in something called Discover the Ride, and I know you have a role in the Suffragist Centennial Ride, and there's Double Down. Can you summarize for us? So it's pretty clear you're an advocate. Can you summarize for us what those irons are?
Yeah, a lot of the projects that you just mentioned were sort of post my time with Indian Motorcycle. So my contract with those guys ended right around the time I was turning 50. And I've got a lot of, white beard, old guy friends, and I always have connected with older dudes. And not one of them ever complained about taking too much time off when they were 50. But they complained about everything else, and I thought, well, here's my chance. And so I took a little bit of a break there and was able to help my dad until he passed away. He was getting pretty ill, so I was able to spend some time with him until he was gone. And then that kind of reset a lot of what I wanted to do in motorcycling. I wasn't, and I'm still not, super fired up about doing PR for one specific brand. What I really enjoy these days is building relationships, and taking the 25 years I've been in motorcycling, and mixing that experience with other people who are enthusiasts as well. So the expressions for that turned into things like the Centennial Ride, which is a woman's ride that celebrates the signing of the 19th amendment into the Constitution, women's rights to vote, and then also other initiatives such as Strider Bikes, All Kids Bike charity work, and then daydreaming up ideas for international motorcycle shows such as Discover the Ride, which is an initiative to take people from pedestrians to riding a motorcycle for the first time in like 10 minutes.
Right.
And so that's the stuff that I'm really, truly enjoying right now is introducing people to the motorcycling category and to power sports in general. And on the short end, converting people quickly through the Discover the Ride program. And then in a more foundational way that works into the future, working with Strider and All Kids Bike to get more kids riding and balancing on two wheels so that we still have an industry in 5, 10, 15 years.
Right. Right. And I remember the 50th birthday kind of turning point for you because you were fairly public about that. And, or at least if we were connected on social media, you were fairly public about it. And ever since then, my sense from you has been that you have been on this mission. And I'm curious to know at what point did you become an evangelist? At what point did this all become a cause for you? Was there a particular moment or an event, or was it just that kind of midlife introspection?
I think it's the accumulation of all these things that I've done. I've referred to myself as a MacGyver in some respects. I'm 80% good at 80% of things. And then the only thing that keeps me from being the world's greatest manager is not always knowing which 20% I'm not good at. Right. And so, that accumulated experience and perspective of time really gave me that chance to kind of sit back and think about what's important in my life. And motorcycles will always be there, to the point that I own an Indian with a sidecar right now in case, someday I'm going to get old and won't be able to hold a bike up. So I've already got I got my cool sidecar rig for that. And so just kind of planning ahead for what I want my life to look like makes me think about other folks and how powerful motorcycling has been as an influence in my life and my friends literally all around the world. I was in England 2 weeks ago, and caught up with 2 different motorcycling friends, and connected with a second cousin who's actually a corner marshal at the Isle of Man. And it's such a great family. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's such a great family of motorcycling that when you realize that each of us individually have an opportunity to bring more people in, and then through my life's experience, I somehow managed to have a voice that's a little bit louder, or I have a little bit more traction in the industry, or more contacts through the work I've done, then it's really just like a failing on your own life if you don't truly believe in something, and then go out and be a fan of it. So I guess it's really all of that life experience kind of came to a head, when I turned 50 and said goodbye to my dad, and makes you think about stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's true what you say about what a powerful experience this is. And, I think in a sense, that's why I started doing this podcast. And I recently had the experience of briefly mentoring somebody who wanted to become a motorcyclist. And in a way that kind of inspired this conversation we're about to have, because I had this feeling that I wasn't just teaching him to play golf, but that there was some kind of, that this was the beginning of a meaningful journey for him. And I kind of found myself wondering afterwards, like, isn't this just a recreational activity? I feel like I've inducted him into a cult or something. And at any rate, I'm don't mean to ramble, but I completely connect with what you're saying. So before we dive into the bigger question of why that is, of why motorcycles matter in the world, why don't we talk for a minute about the industry perspective on this? Obviously, motorcycles matter to them on an existential level, but what, from your point of view, is the industry seeing right now? Does it feel threatened? Is it optimistic? What's the tone of things?
Oh, wow. So this is a lame answer. It's both. And I think it really boils down to an individual perspective. I do believe that there are some senior management at some major brands out there and some influence organizations who are feeling the significant disconnect between their analog rise in the industry and then the digital era in which we must operate now. And I think that's a big thought there. So that is causing kind of a disconnect with who our potential new riders are. And that's really a problem for us. I do think it will get better as we get, new perspectives in, as we change the way we talk about motorcycling and community from the traditional ways we do it. So in terms of there being an overall optimism or pessimism or whatever, numbers don't lie. And one of my old bosses, Steve Minetto from Polaris Industries, would be the first one to tell you that everybody's in the sales department, no matter what your title is, right? It boils down to numbers. Are we selling the motorcycles at the right profits in order to justify continuation in this business? And in some segments, the answer is a resounding no, that things are getting really tight. If you look at the real high end, $30,000 luxury touring bikes, if you look at the changes in the adventure bike market, if you look at the rise of smaller brands like Zero and Janus, and brands that are making compellingly different products from everything else out there, there are people that are extremely happy and riding a wave on the way up and see those opportunities, and there are others who I think are upset that things aren't the way they used to be. And frankly, they're never going to be, not in my lifetime, they're not going to be the way they used to be.
No.
Because the way an entire generation was raised, the way the boomers were raised, motorcycles were actually in the sweet spot for their attention.
Yeah.
But the way millennials have been raised and the way subsequent generations will be raised is not going to channel people directly into motorcycling unless we adopt programs like All Kids Bike, where we teach every child in the country to ride. And then just by sheer volume of numbers, we will create motorcyclists.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's funny that you...
Yeah, so I can, I'll tell you that there's not one, sorry to interrupt, there's not one single sentiment. And that's the frustrating part, is because everyone's kind of looking for an answer, and it's not an answer. It's a lot of little switches that are gonna have to turn on. And it's not just like one cool thing. And some people just don't want to do the work for what it's going to take to get there.
Yeah, that rings true to me. I mean, as a recovering marketing guy, I find it worrisome that so much of the conversation is about doom and gloom. I mean, you're right, the numbers don't lie, and I understand that new bike sales, have been under some pressure for a few years. But I also know that registrations are, still robust, and that there's a giant supply of, used bikes from 2008, 2009 that are still in the system, and that there's a reason to believe that the cycles this business has gone through in the past are simply repeating themselves, maybe at a greater scale. At least there's evidence enough to suggest that it's probably better business to be hopeful. I wonder if you think the industry is being smart about this.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, this industry is just loaded with incredibly smart people, and people who are very passionate about this. There's very few people who get into motorcycling and go like, I'm getting into this business because I want to make $1 million, right? You know what I mean? This is really it's an industry of passion.
Yeah.
And, whereas in other areas of like, real estate or going into a, finance company or something like that like the end goal is to be, wealthy or whatever. And that delivers a certain happiness in life. The thing about motorcycling is like, no, the motorcycling is delivering the happiness in my life, right? I want to just do more of that.
Right.
And so I'll go ahead and work in this industry. If you're lucky, you invest properly and you get to, get those things that other people have. But by and large, this is not an industry that people go in to do that. So it's really driven by passion, which is a plus and a minus, right? Because you can be blinded by that. And then when things change, you don't understand why kids don't just go buy Z50s and ride in empty fields across the street anymore.
Right.
And it's like, well, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, because the cops will get called and mom's going to ground you, right?
Right.
And so it's just I absolutely believe that there are loads of smart people. What I believe that there is not enough of is this kind of simple conversation, which is what Give a Shift was about. And is about, and which is what, your podcast is hitting on, is, you have to have conversations that are not a minute and a half long soundbite, but are something that you actually start chewing on and think about and process as you're falling asleep or driving down the road.
Right.
So the industry would impress me a lot more if they facilitated more opportunities for these smart people to talk to each other and find common language and common solutions, because we all are making something with two wheels and a motor. That's the fundamental silhouette of a motorcycle is exactly the same for every brand out there. And so categorically we have failed to communicate with each other. And that's really what's hurting us.
Yeah. Well, as I say, that rings true. I mean, I don't have the insider point of, perspective that you do. But that does ring true. I'm thinking a little bit about this idea of, the decline in interest among young people for motorcycling, and I accept at face value that that's happening. But in my travels, I've had this impression that there is a group of young people who have in fact embraced motorcycles, and interestingly have embraced motorcycles past. And it kind of defies simple analysis. I think there's some maker culture stuff at work here, and there's some mythologizing cosplay and a bit of Steve McQueen envy and some gender stuff and a bit of repudiation of the digital life and probably a bunch of other things. But it feels very real to me. If you go to a custom show or any kind of a moto social or any kind of gathering, there is a striking number of young people who are, kind of holding on to this thing with both arms. So I guess, first of all, do you see that? And secondly, does the industry see that? And what do you think they make of it?
So yeah, I absolutely see that. You hit on it before that there's a really great collection of used motorcycles available out on the market. I myself, I just like a couple of months ago, I bought a used 2009 Sportster that had 650 miles on it. It was a 10-year-old bike with 650 miles on it, and I bought it for $3,500. And once I cleaned it up,
wow,
and got the rust out of the gas tank, it's a great basic motorcycle. I had to go and screw it all up and turn it into a dirt bike, but the core motorcycle was amazing, right? For $3,500, I mean, less than the price of a Honda Grom.
Right.
And so that pool of those bikes that were relatively simple, and seemingly more approachable, and everything old is new again, right? So all of a sudden you're going to start seeing paint jobs from the 70s, the bold graphics. That's the cool thing now, and yellow motorcycles with blue and orange stripes on them and stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's just going to start coming back around again. So there is an approachability to that young people do enjoy. The industry would love to see those people trade those bikes in and move up to a mid-level, cruiser or bagger and start to get into the $20,000-$30,000 thing. But what I think largely the industry doesn't understand is that many, many young people are buying motorcycles as an accessory to their life,
right?
Not as a definition of their lifestyle,
right?
And that is a very different thought than the boomers who are like, "Oh, I made it in my life, and I'm going to buy this thing, and I'm going to flaunt my $30,000 custom based bike with a bunch of other guys to prove that I made it."
Right.
And it's a really different context for motorcycling. So I think it is exciting. I'm sure the Motorcycle Misfit podcast.
Yep.
I mean, they do an amazing job out there. They're part of a shared garage, a collective garage mentality, which comes like right out of the 50s and hot rod shops from the 50s and stuff. And that is absolutely something that can come back and be a strong initiative. Now, that said, the products that OEMs currently sell, by and large, do not fit that mold. They are complicated. They have a lot of mysterious black boxes. They require specialty tools to work on. They are incredibly fast, or they are incredibly expensive, or whatever, right? And then on the other side of it is, if you say you refurbish a Honda CB550 into something really cool, if you go and try and trade that in at your local dealership, they're just going to laugh you out of it. They don't want to deal with that. They don't want to sell that,
right?
And so there's a disconnect between what's cool and what's enjoyable in a fashion stylistic way versus the products that are available on the floor right now, certainly with several exceptions out there, Janus being one of them that comes to top of mind, how different that is when it's based on a Chinese 230cc 4-stroke 2-valve air-cooled engine, which is the same thing as a Suzuki Van. And that bike can sell for, $10,000-$11,000, and the Van, barely sells at $5,000.
Right. Right.
So there's something there. We are missing a formula in the on the OEM side of this industry, and perhaps that's just the position that they're in, and it's not fixable.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that's not true. I mean, you used the word fashion earlier, and it got me thinking. I mean, and I hate to paint this with such a broad brush, but it's interesting to me how many young people have found their way back to sort of choppers and other forms of custom bikes that kind of echo what we used to call the working class roots of motorcycling in some way, that are kind of anti-elitist, if you like. You know, when you look at the clothing that companies are trying to sell them, you can see that, or the way they kind of dress themselves to ride, you can see this very strong declaration that they're making, that they have no interest in being associated with the kind of person who's at the helm of a $30,000 Harley or a big GS. But I don't know. It almost seems to me like they're sending a message to the industry that the sort of common person is really the soul of the sport, and they want to get back to that. So this is kind of a long question, but bear with me because you touched on this earlier. So I find it interesting that you have commented more than once on the importance of Generation X to the motorcycle industry. And for the record, I agree. I think there's a ton of misinformation about this cohort, and a lot of straight up twaddle floating around out there, and that the stone cold fact is that it is a considerable market, and it doesn't get enough attention really from anybody. I mean, this is a sickness that marketing in general probably is afflicted by too. What's interesting to me, among other things, about Gen X is that their life experience straddles the line between the industrial age and the digital age. And I think you made reference to that earlier. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. Are Xers some kind of cultural bridge to motorcycling's origins? Or put another way, I'm sorry, this is a classic nerdy Bruce question, but put another way, if we lose them, does motorcycling somehow risk losing its own plot?
I don't, if from now on no Generation Xers got back into motorcycling, I don't think that would, in the aggregate, 20 years from now, I don't think that would fundamentally change the overall numbers, interestingly, okay? Because Generation Xers currently don't, and again, broad brush, you can always poke holes in every theory, and then there's like a unicorn in the bunch. So I'm just talking about a broader generational thing.
Right.
But that drive for a reward product in your life is different. Gen X grew up in a different way, and suffered through a couple of different major financial setbacks and student debt stuff, and blah blah blah, and an 18-year long ongoing war, and it's just stuff like that.
Right.
So how motorcycling fits into their life is wholly upon us as an industry to speak to that language. And the challenge is that when we try and speak to that like I'm on the front edge of Generation X at 53 years old this year. And so Gen X is the new empty nester. And the thing that's very different from what we think about from a boomer empty nester is that the boomer empty nester had to wait until generally they were, 60, 65 to retire. And then they could go do what they wanted to. There's a significant number of Gen X who can work remotely, and know how to do that. Now, I mean, Gen X basically, leveraged the internet for their own freedom and taught their kids how to use it. So Gen X was born analog. You can make jokes about film and Gilligan's Island and Saturday morning cartoons with a Gen Xer that don't even resonate with subsequent generations, right?
Right.
They were born analog, and Gen X will die digital. That'll be the first generation that starts having digital funerals, for instance.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
What is it? What is that? What was that look like? I don't know yet, but it's going to happen, and so that's a compelling thing. The opportunity for this industry in regards to Generation X is to position a particular type of motorcycle as that accessory to your latter third of your life. And that motorcycle is not going to be an 850 pound, heavy cruiser, or a 600 pound, 180 horsepower superbike. It is going to be something that's more along the lines of a Van or a TW200 or a CB300 or a Versus 300 or those smaller approachable bikes that renew that freedom that they had when they were kids. Gen Xers were bicyclists, much more so than millennials, and sort of connects you back to your old analog sensibilities. We all understand that motorcycling is an analog experience, regardless of how electronic the particular bike is. The act of engaging a throttle to thrust yourself through the wind the reward is wholly analog, right?
Yep.
And so Gen X can appreciate that. I don't believe that the industry has marketed to Gen X. I believe that they've skipped over marketing to Gen X and sort of lumped them in with young baby boomers. And now all the pressure all of a sudden is on millennials to buy bikes. So as we have this generation, if you look at RV sales are moving up, and they're moving up with quote, younger people. Mm-hmm. It's not the traditional 70-year-old, husband and wife who are, driving around being snowbirds, right? It's changing. And the RVs are generally getting smaller and more approachable and used more for weekend camping rather than epic trips. And so motorcycling can fit into that, but that does take a different mindset on our part. And it also is a significant change to the profit model of the industry. It requires a ton more volume to make money on Van 200s than it does a bunch of heavy super bikes.
Right. Yeah, I think I buy most of that. The interesting thing about Gen Xers is that they are getting, as you said, to the point where they're going to be the next empty nesters, and that has historically been a kind of hot moment for people to kind of look for products like this. And what's interesting to me about Gen Xers is that they were fundamentally nihilistic, and that strikes me as an attribute that docks well with what a motorcycle can be. So I've read the things that you've written about this, and listening to you right now, I kind of think maybe they shouldn't be overlooked at all. Not least of which because of the size of that market, which I would argue is bigger than most conventional definitions, but also because they get it. I mean, Gen X invented the millennials, is the historical, kind of fact of the matter. So that's a pretty deep rabbit hole, but super interesting to me.
I'm agreeing with you completely. And what I'm saying is that I don't believe that the industry has done a compelling job of marketing to Gen X. I'm not saying that Gen X isn't going to appreciate what a motorcycle can do for them in their life. I just think they don't know yet. And they think what Gen X thinks is motorcycling, they think is an 800-pound heavy cruiser.
Right. Because
that's what, that was the boomer reward, right?
Yep.
Until we do things like have a Versus 300 with an automatic clutch, Colorado high pass tour package that you can come in, learn how to ride. You got an automatic clutch to kind of get you going, nice and easy, and then you get to ride up and have your Instagram moments on the top of Cinnamon Pass.
Right.
It's like that's the kind of epic thing that they're looking for. It's not going to happen on $30,000 bike. It's too intimidating. So if just another quick scenario is like when it comes to Suzuki, I see the Van 200 as being the hero in that lineup, not the GSX-R 1000, because there's an approachability to that Van that can have a beach party vibe and a surf scene vibe to it that is very comforting for everybody.
Yep.
Whereas Supercross or super bikes, which kind of look spectacular, are something to witness from the outside. The surf scene kind of vibe and the custom vibe which we see in the One Show and hand built and stuff like that, that's something you want to be in the middle of and experience. So I really think there's massive opportunity. I just don't think that we're connecting in a compelling way with Gen X.
Right. So actually, I think I'll come back to them in a minute, without seeming obsessive about this. But just to kind of digress for a second, it seems to me that the cultural meaning of motorcycles, that as we've been discussing it, is pretty much a Western phenomenon. I'm kind of making air quotes. Bikes don't carry the same symbolic freight in other parts of the world, where they're more commonly accepted as a form of transportation. I wonder if you think there's something particular about places like this, the United States, Canada, Australia, et cetera, where the motorcycle is no longer generally a necessity, and it is kind of ascended to this, iconic status. What do you think it is about this that we still need in our lives?
Well, America was given, one thing that most industrialized nations weren't, and that's just space. We have an enormous amount of space here, and all you have to do is go to a grocery store in India to understand the delta in personal space compared to the States, right? So the automobile fit, we have room for it. In the 50s, houses were designed around the garage, instead of being designed around the formal greeting room. Neighborhoods and subdivisions were built that way. The lobbying industry in Washington, D.C. for automobiles is huge, blah, blah, blah. So there's all the historic trends that make it easier for an automobile industry to have it over motorcycling. Motorcycling as entertainment, it was certainly a post-war phenomenon, post-World War II phenomenon. With the sort of growth of custom motorcycles and that sort of scene, and then that blip of you meet the nicest people in the 60s. Honda and Yamaha was part of it too, very smartly, took the opposite tack to where traditional motorcycling was going. So all of that said, the opportunity to reintroduce motorcycling to a generation of people who are completely used to final mile electric scooters being littered all over the streets in Austin. Right. That, it's not very far to take you from understanding how to operate that to getting you onto a class 3 electric bicycle, to getting you onto a scooter, to getting you onto a zero electric motorcycle, to eventually teaching you how to ride a motorcycle, if that is the ultimate goal.
Right.
So we currently now, in any major urban environment, are starting to see where powered two-wheelers in the form of bicycles or electric scooters are becoming absolutely accepted, whether you like it or not. But they are becoming accepted as part of a transportation matrix, right? And a lot of money is going in towards that. Why those scooters aren't, Honda red and Yamaha blue and KTM orange blows my mind, but they aren't. Right. They're uber black and lime green, right? And so the pump is primed with those people who understand that. If all of a sudden, purely from a transportation standpoint, we were to engage our lobbying efforts to make free motorcycle parking available in urban areas, then that sense of transportation solution absolutely will come into play. Not for everyone, because not everybody wants to be exposed. Not everyone wants helmet hair. So all the other dumb excuses, right? But we, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, there is a younger generation who will accept powered solutions for transportation And then how do you increase that radius with a bigger battery and a bigger motorcycle, and and then eventually someday want to ride something across the country. So it is a really interesting time, but we're allowing that to happen completely separately from motorcycling.
Right.
And it's a huge miss on our part.
Right. Yeah, I hear your commitment to that view. It's interesting to me that you see it as a continuum, and that a role in the transportation matrix, to use your term, is going to be essential to its survival. Because I find myself wondering if that somehow makes them less special. You clearly don't fear that. Was that a fair statement?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's less special at all. I think that I think it really just opens a lot of people's eyes. I got from A to B a lot faster on this two-wheeled motorized thing. I wonder if I can go from A to B to C to D to E.
Right.
I wonder what that's like.
Right.
And then so I really think that there are gateways to this, and then we have to embrace what that can do for us. It's not going to be 100% transfer, but it's not 100% transfer in the transportation world anyway. It's only like 7% of us that are into motorcycling who are into any kind of transportation. So,
yeah. Well, I guess that puts the bigger question into some context. I mean, if I were to say, what would we be missing if there was no such thing as a motorcycle? I think the answer in a lot of the world would be that we would be missing transportation for the 99%. That's a short conversation. But in countries like the ones that we live in, where motorcycles eventually lost that role to cars, it seems to me it's something else that would be missing, and not simply transportation. And yet I feel like they would still leave a huge void if motorcycles disappeared tomorrow. And I would go so far as to say I think most people would miss them somehow, even if they'd never thrown a leg over. There's something about them in our culture that matters. Do you agree that there would be a huge void if there was no such thing as motorcycles?
So if we go back in time, there was a time that wheeled vehicles weren't commonplace, right? And there was a time that horses were everywhere, and there was hitching posts, and then Model Ts started to rumble into town, and that started to change the dynamic of things. And there's always going to be a sense of like a fear of that change and that kind of thing. What I think motorcycling gives those of us who understand it and participate to somebody who doesn't necessarily participate is that sense of accessible freedom, that you can walk up to this thing that can fit in almost any garage with a car. You can walk up to this thing, turn it on, and it is that analog reward, right? Cars are more and more installative, and with sound deadeners and active audio to kill outside noises and stuff like that. Whereas motorcycling is not that. There's a immediate analog accessibility to that I think is the envy of many people who don't participate in motorcycling. The other, voice of danger or access or fear or need for training or misunderstanding of equipment, all these other things that, again, we don't do a great job of knocking those other things down, get in the way of getting to experience that. So again, if I go back to, I think that there is a great opportunity for in Detroit, in an urban market, for there to be like, a scooter tour of old Detroit, right? To get on a really, a funky little electric scooter thing and go cruising around and get to see, the old Detroit factories in an interesting way. And to experience and to there's an old saying that, being in a car is like watching a movie. Riding a motorcycle is like being in it. And so I think that more of that sensibility keeps people interested in motorcycling. But certainly with the rise of these last mile vehicles and electric assist bicycles, there is going to continue to be access to that, but in a different way. Mm. And things are going to change. Yamaha is the oldest electric bicycle manufacturer in the world, right? They've been doing it for 15, 18 years, something like that. I don't know if they're the oldest, but they're certainly the biggest, and they've been one of the longest running in Asia. And it was only last year that Yamaha brought a whole new division of electric, bicycle division to the States, which is not under motorcycling. Same logo is on the piano. Same logo is on the motorcycles, same block letters, right? Is on this bicycle. So if Yamaha sees that there's going to be a feeder coming up, it strikes me that, other brands should be paying attention to that sort of thing. So I think there'll always be an interest in motorcycling, but I think that our failure to make it more approachable to more people will also ultimately be our own undoing if we don't change things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And, to me, I get the practical argument. The thing that I'm curious about, or maybe the thing that I'm hoping for, is that there's a matching emotional one. That we would miss motorcycles as much as we would miss horses, even though we don't use them as transportation anymore. That sort of thing. And I wonder. So why don't let's dig into that for a second. So that was a good answer. I have another answer for you, and I'm interested to hear what you think. Did you see The Art of the Motorcycle, the exhibit at the Guggenheim in '98?
Yes.
Wow, you're a lucky man. I did not, and it is one of the great regrets of my life. So I'm going to refer to that here. Apparently, so if you have the book that went with that exhibit, and you probably do, at the front of the book there are some notes which were made in 1993, before that exhibition was mounted, by the curator, Thomas Krenz, and he's explaining, I guess, to a committee or something, why motorcycles deserve to be in the Guggenheim. And he says the following: "The motorcycle is a perfect metaphor for the 20th century. Invented at the beginning of the industrial age, its evolution tracks the main currents of modernity." So, he's an art curator, so we'll forgive him the language. Sure. The object and its history represent the themes of technology, engineering, innovation, design, mobility, speed, rebellion, desire, freedom, love, sex, and death. What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's spot on.
I thought so too. That's the thing that I feel like we have to figure out how to package, because that's a pretty powerful cultural symbol, and it isn't only because the 20th century needs to be documented somehow, but because I think these things are still useful to us, which I guess is kind of what we're going to talk about next, because he goes on to say in those notes that the motorcycle would appear to be, and remember this is 1993, that the motorcycle would appear to be near the end of its evolution as a piece of engineering, that there's almost no more we can get out of it. And I'll quote him here. He says, "Logic and physics suggest the motorcycle has reached the end of its evolutionary potential, but somehow we know that cannot be completely true. As such, however, it is a quintessential symbol of the insecurity and optimism of our time," which I thought, again, was prescient. What do you think about that?
I think that's spot on. And, I walked over to my shelf here and I grab out my own copy, and I actually remember a quote here that I'm just digging up. It is by Richard Gall, who at the time was the Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs, BMW Group. He wrote, "Over the century of the motorcycle's existence, it has ridden the high and low points of history, reflecting society and the diverse directions it has taken. The motorized two-wheeler, originally a vehicle of necessity, has evolved into a means of expressing individuality and a symbol of active, optimistic lifestyles." Now, I mean, that sentence is 100% applies to today.
Right? I agree. I totally agree. And don't you wish they would mount that exhibit again? It's so relevant.
Well, yeah, but it would be different. It would be done in this like weird retrospective way instead of like leaning. Like maybe it could be done the right way to start to bring in some of the new stuff. The electric motorcycle exhibit at the Peterson Museum is really cool. Paul d'Orleans at the Vintage Inn, he curated that one. So, but it's a the more we expose people to what Two Wheels is all about, the more people will stay in our family. And that is the point of like Discover the Ride that we're doing with IMS. And that is the point with All Kids Bike. Mm-hmm. So if we want to discuss numbers and the volume and how to create community and that sort of thing, that's where it's going to come from.
Right.
The rest of us who are already converted, it is our job to shepherd in people into those places, and be the hero, be the one who introduced somebody to motorcycling. That's the number one thing that we can do as people who already understand this language and this culture.
Right. Yep. I think that's well put. And I think the thing that sort of the challenge that lies in front of us is how to persuasively argue that is a common good. And I think that the two quotes that we just shared, particularly the one you just shared, do a pretty good job of summarizing that. I thought you said if the exhibition was mounted again, it would have a weird retrospective quality, and it kind of got me thinking about a particular project that you did with Indian motorcycles, which was the Spirit of Monroe replica bike. And the promotional video for that, which our mutual friend Todd Egan was involved in as well, which I thought was just terrific. It was just a great fun to watch, and it put that brand in its own place for me as opposed to opposite Harley. So it was great work from a marketing perspective. It had, though, about it a kind of wistful nostalgia. And I wonder whether that's part of what motorcycles are, and the answer is probably yes. Are they, artifacts of a bygone era, and is that part of why we love them? Or is there more to the story? I wonder, looking back on that and maybe just generally this idea of nostalgia, what you think.
Well, I will take you back to, what was that? 2012 when Polaris bought Indian. Okay.
Right. Yep.
At that time, within 9 months, the final Indian Chief had been on the drawing board, and the first prototype fired up. I mean, incredible industrial timing to build a vehicle from scratch, right? And the purpose of that whole exercise was specifically to hook Harley Davidson enthusiasts to understand that there's another player who speaks their language.
Right.
And that's what that was for. So at the time that came out, there was zero knowledge of an Indian Scout. There was zero knowledge of FTR or racing flat track or Travis Pastrana jumping over fountains or Wall of Death or any other, this like sort of active, hustle hooligan racing kind of vibe, right? It was very much comfortable brown leather coat. It was very much part of the, hey, look at me. I'm different in the sea of black. I've got this red motorcycle, and it came from a really different place. So the purpose of Spirit of Monroe, which is, and I think about that bike a lot. And I'm still friends with Todd and Jeb Skolman, who built it, and I was just chatting today with Adam Brumman, the guy who directed that film, and so that the purpose of that bike was to be a catalyst to rip Indian out of what it had been, its sort of most recent malaise, and to embrace it in something that was emotionally familiar but still challenging. Which is really the purpose of what that was to say Indian is back, but not in the way that you expected it to be. Ironically, we built a streamlined motorcycle that completely hid the engine in order to announce the new engine. Right.
Right.
So, that nostalgia is something that market at that time was really, really comfortable in. But it's not something that the current Indian motorcycle, and I think it'll cycle. But, when I was in Sturgis in the last 2 years, I couldn't help but notice there wasn't one vintage Indian in the corporate display at Sturgis, right? Everything was a current era motorcycle. So I think nostalgia is important. I think more important than just pure nostalgia is authenticity. I think that there are human stories and product stories that we can continue to sell, but they have to be authentic to the brand. So that's the challenge that Harley's having with the Livewire and with their proposed other products is how do you emotionally connect the Harley Davidson Americana, Screaming Eagle kind of vibe to what this electric thing is. Right. And, so that's their whole challenge. Whereas Zero, coming from a clean slate, they're just like, we're just going to make it go fast and, and be reasonably cool.
Right. Yeah. It's a troubling relationship motorcycling has with nostalgia because it has, it's a double-edged sword, let's say. I mean, I have to be honest, that is part of what I love about motorcycles because they make me regress. They do seem to hurl life backwards to a simpler time or an analog time, to use your word. And they give me a kind of emotional release that's hard to get as we, get older and the world has its way with us. But I also know that I'm part of a demographic for whom that connection is more literal. So I remembered when scramblers actually scrambled, so to speak. Does riding have that effect on you? And do you think it has that effect on younger riders? I mean, with no personal reference to that past, what do you think nostalgia means to them?
No, I think we've already hit on that. When you go in and you look at some of the coolest bikes at the one show, they're built by 25-year-old guy who's taking a DR 650 and turning it into a retro scrambler,
right?
And so that there is that draw to the simplicity to that analog reward for being part of this. It's absolutely there. We just have to do a better job of we can't take it for granted.
Right.
I think is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Is that I am a huge believer that we shoot ourselves in the foot on a consistent basis because we have fully embraced this sense of product ladder. That it's your job to move up as a motorcyclist. It's your job to move up in the categories of motorcycling. That that it's ridiculous to think that somebody's end goal could be they'd be happy on a CB 500, and that person may be perfectly happy on a CB 500 for the rest of their lives. Maybe that's all they want. And they're good with that, but they're going to continue to buy tires and helmets and insurance, and then maybe start to go on trips and get a windscreen and blah, blah, blah. And so the nostalgia, is a very comfortable embracing thing. You see it in automotive. How many old, here's Ford is killing off every car they have, or except for like the Mustang, right? And so it is something that's absolutely comfortable. It's something that I bought a Cuisinart air fryer thing, because I'm single, right? So I get to cook my chicken every now and then, and I don't want to fire up the big oven. And this Cuisinart has this sort of very comfortably sort of retro kind of 50s, 60s oven vibe to it. Very clean. It's got twisty knobs and not push button electronic display on it. And I was like, wow, that's cool, right? And so I do think that there's a place for nostalgia on a product basis. I think there's certainly a place for nostalgia in marketing, but I think if it's not wrapped in authenticity, then it just seems like just another BS tool to sell me something.
Yeah, I think that's right. I look at companies like Honda, who made a big deal of the launch of the Monkey Bike and the Super Cub last year at at the various motorcycle shows. And I was caught between feeling that, on the one hand, I want both of those bikes. I want to own them. But on the other hand, they both harken back specifically to a boomer frame of reference. And I found myself wondering whether that was wise, whether there was any chance that might alienate people. Do you think nostalgia is dangerous that way or not?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it is. I think it is dangerous in that sense. The products, the answer in our industry is not nuts and bolts product. It's not, like, let's make this thing and that'll fix it. The broad answer in our industry is how do we make the category of motorcycling more intriguing? And the flavor of bike you choose at that point is kind of up to you. So, if Honda at the time they introduced the Monkey, also announced for a year later that there was going to be the International Monkey Cup, and that was going to be a custom bike competition and a 50 or a 125cc hill climb and a beach race and a yada yada. And it's like, here's all the you meet the nicest people. When you look at those old posters and those old graphics, people they're all smiling. They're wearing like light and easy clothing. There was no black leather and stuff like that. It was just fun and approachable. And that's exactly what those bikes are. But if you just like plop the product out there with the reference of the past without giving it any context for how it can fit into my future, then you just kind of miss the plot. And it's just leaning on the product. If we don't fundamentally uplift the culture, if there wasn't a dealer-based opportunity for a Monkey Gymkhana in their parking lot on a Sunday, right? That you can't tell me that Honda could absolutely design a dealer-only accessory where it's like an uncrashable Monkey. Like it's like tip over bars with roller wheels on them, and then it's automatic first gear, and you can't shift it out a second, right? I mean that's all mechanical stuff, real easy to facilitate. And then you can literally take an unlicensed person because you're on a piece of private property on a bike that's speed limited that can physically cruise around in a tight area and offer that experience, and then layer in this like sort of semi-expert fun gymkhana riding type of thing and create that community, and concurrently you're creating the Instagram moment for everyone to take pictures of, or slow motion video of somebody cruising by or whatever. And so it's just pure reliance on just here's the nuts and bolt product, rather than speaking about lifestyle. In my opinion, one of the brands that did a good job of that, but then all of a sudden seemingly put the brakes on that, was Ducati and their Scrambler line. When it first came out, the hero color was yellow, right? It wasn't Ducati red. And all the images of the bikes and the lifestyle stuff was, younger people having fun, wearing less technical clothing, not at a racetrack. They were out on a beach. They're out, and the motorcycle was only 50% of the promotional video. All the lifestyle and the smiling, beautiful people were the other 50%. And whereas you look at a Panigale video and it's like there's 5% of a guy walking up to the bike and then the rest of these just shredding, through the track. Yeah. So, then it's like, so that there's a fundamental difference. They did a really good job of that. But, we've referenced a few times these custom motorcycle shows. At the IMS shows, there is a big custom scene. We've had a consistent custom motorcycle show as being part of that, but there's also the static vintage and custom display, just to come look and people to show their stuff off. And that's always been popular. So, creating the lifestyle, creating the place for that to happen, is something we are less good at now, but it is something that is easier to do than ever. And one thing I'll reference on LinkedIn, I think we're connected on LinkedIn, but I forget the name of the gentleman, one of the co-founders of the Bike Shed in London. Yep. They just announced their first outdoor like running motorcycle thing, because they've done an indoor show like hand built for a few years, and it's huge. They had 17,000 people come through the show, and it's really cool, progressive, modern young designers and craftspeople doing this sort of stuff. And now they're like they're wanting to do something where it's like these are motors running and people riding, and then you have a good time, and at the end of the day, you sit down around a fire to have a beer and start to tell stories. So the Revival guys are doing that here in Austin with an event called the Twist Off, which is just like dirt drag racing and you can bring whatever old chopper or whatever out and go have fun. So there is a sense of activation to bring people in, but that's all to facilitate culture, which has to be done in a more turnkey way because it's not organic the way it was in the 60s, because there's too many other options.
Right. So I'm nodding furiously, and you probably answered the next three questions. So I was going to say, so what we're obviously not nostalgic for a time, but for things that come from that time. And I think your response to that is there's a sense of carefreeness and an involvement and a perception that, that life was more focused on having fun then. And so I buy that. And the idea that these retro style motorcycles are museum pieces if we don't also turn them over to new riders and let them make them their own. So in other words, we invite them in with the promise of a connection to that, regressive experience, but then we let them actually have the regressive experience. That is very smart. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Trog is that way.
Right.
The sand races with the old, that's witnessing and hearing history. And more of that is going to continue to happen. But the OEM side of the participation has been largely stuck in the, let's hang up a few banners on the wall and
right.
We can show off, one of our latest models. It's trying to apply a very old thought into a new market, and it just doesn't feel authentic, right?
Yep. That makes sense. So let's pretend for a minute that Thomas Krenz, that curator guy, had it mostly right, that motorcycles are a symbol of some human things that we don't want to leave behind as we march into our technically perfect future. He made that observation in the early 90s when everybody could feel that things were changing, but they hadn't changed yet. And now they are. And so I guess you've touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to ask you straight out, how would you grade the industry's strategy since that time? Did it understand what was happening, and was it self-aware about this stuff?
The only answer to what is the industry strategy is the fact that it's largely, 99% siloed. Meaning each individual brand is tackling it in their own way. So the industry, quote unquote, is there's not. What's the slogan for the motorcycling? What's the just do it?
Right. I don't know.
what's the got milk for the entire category of motorcycling? We asked that question at a Give a Shift happy hour I did a year and a half ago, and there were absolutely representatives from all the major Japanese brands and Harley Davidson there. I knew some of these people who were just kind of hiding in the shadows, but that's, MIC was invited, but chose not to be there. AMA was there. I'll give them credit for being there. But it's like, what is it? What is the thing that we can all collectively do, or Ducati can express it in a different way that Honda does? So again, going to the attitude of the industry is siloed largely in a sales perspective of what can we do to move iron in the next 3 to 6 to 9 months. Right. And it's not a categorical uplifting of all things motorcycling. And that, you can argue that's because of technology and targeted marketing and all the things that have changed since that era. I believe that the industry absolutely fundamentally wants to be optimistic. I think they have to be to keep their job. But I think that the opportunity to get together and speak to that is just as compelling now as it was 3 years or 2 years ago when we did give a shift and, that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
So I don't, I'm not going to put words in any OEM's mouths. And I sincerely hope that there are executives who are willing to, speak to these kinds of questions, to what their various brands see, but in a truly deep manner, not just, 3 talking points, but, in a compelling manner. And we'll see that very quickly. Again, we're all talking about things that have 2 wheels and propulsion.
Yeah.
So it's a category we need to elevate, not just the nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wheels are turning. So as we talk about the industry, I guess I'm kind of thinking about technical innovation. You've touched on that a little bit. I don't think we need to debate the merits of motorcycles that will save you from crashing, or motorcycles that don't burn hydrocarbons, or motorcycles that have airbags. I mean, these are good things, and even my most analog motorcycle still has fuel injection and AB. I'm not in principle opposed to bikes getting better in those ways, but I'm interested to know whether you think that bikes are still honoring their purpose in the world as they get safer and better and easier to ride. Do you think they are, and do you think anybody else is worrying about that?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I'm not, anti-modern by any means. I'm on an advisory board for a company called Damon Motorcycles out of Canada that is making they're, in prototype phase or whatever, but they're making one of the most safe motorcycles outside of that, that self-driving BMW that doesn't actually require someone to sit on it.
Right.
So that's the safest motorcycle in the world, is when you just watch from the outside. So Damon is making a bike that has shape-shifting features where it actually, the rider triangle changes on the go, not just like unbolting something, but it physically moves up and down. It has a series of sensor arrays that are feeding technology up, or feeding information up into a cloud. As more and more people ride, they feed more and more information. And then all of a sudden, you can imagine in the future where you get an insurance discount for choosing to take a safer route, right? That's how that could play itself out.
Right.
And then they even have sensors on that would not only give you like this sort of sixth sense of emergency braking and accident avoidance, but actually be able to like nudge that, in the same way that I drove a girlfriend's Chevy Tahoe a few years ago, and it had this like lane keeping thing where it sort of nudged the steering. But it noticed that you were drifting off, and it didn't just vibrate or didn't chime, or it literally physically like nudged the steering back towards the center line,
right?
Inside your hands, right? So that kind of thing is definitely going to come around, and I think that Gen X, who were the generation that saw a huge increase in divorce rates. Therefore, there were more latchkey kids than there had been. Therefore, they were at the same time as CNN, was starting to be in every household. And then you start to learn about, murders in Atlanta while you live in Chicago. And all of a sudden the world seems like a scarier place. So the television becomes a pacifier that those kids grew up to give their old iPhones to their kids as a pacifier. I mean, that's like a big duh. So there is a sense that the current generation or millennials are like these bubble wrapped kids that are scared of adventure. And I think that that's BS. I think that adventure is part of the human spirit, but I think, but gaining access to that is critical. And then knowing that safety systems can be there to back you up is also going to continue to be important.
Right.
So I remember in the 80s when ABS started to be a thing on cars, like every car had like that had ABS would have like 13 ABS logos on the thing,
right?
On the glove box door and on every wheel and on the back trunk lid. And now it's mandated. So you can't buy a car without ABS. They all come with ABS and stability control and stuff like that. And so, so I think that sort of stuff, I mean, the Grom comes with a front wheel ABS. It comes with single channel ABS, and that's awesome. I just take it for granted, that it's going to. So I do think that those systems can help increase ridership. And there are still, old school guys who are like, oh man, give me that Linkert carburetor because I can fix that on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And I challenge them that they no longer ride it. There is no middle of nowhere anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And it sounds like you don't feel like that diminishes the essential experience at all.
No. You're still out in space. You're still moving through space. I think where I would feel like we've lost the plot. I mean, some people are going to say it's like, well, ABS, I don't need ABS, and you should learn how to, you don't need traction control. You should learn how to work your throttle and stuff like that. So there are always people who are going to rebuff that. I mean, I own a 1925 Ford Model T, and the guy I bought it from was telling me stories about how it wasn't until 1919 that all of them came with electric starters. They used to be hand crank only, and that was an option to put the electric starter on there. And when the electric starters were on there, the old school guys were just like, "Oh, that technology. You don't need that." They were rebuffing the technology of an electric starter. They still wanted to go out and hand crank the car. And so it's it's an evolution. That's the one thing that humans do. Better than any other animal is to, evolve to our conditions and invent ways to continue to survive. So I think that that'll still happen, but as long as we're not sitting inside an insulated bubble and, without feeling the wind, it's the wind, man. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
It's just knowing that you're out there in the environment.
So how would you respond to this? I think there are probably people who would argue, and if I'm honest, I kind of feel this way. I'm not sure I think this way, but I feel this way, who would argue that for motorcycling to be what we say it is, it has to be a bit difficult and it has to have stakes. And these things are, mitigating against both of those qualities. How would you respond to that?
I don't think it has to. I think that there can be, they're inherently unstable devices, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody hadn't invented the kickstand, they'd all be flopped over on their side. Right. So the danger is already there. Right. And then you're exposed, you're sitting outside. If you wear an open face helmet, and there's a bug, you're going to get hit like right in your flesh, right? And you're going to have bug guts on your cheek. And there's no denying that just happened, right? So that's always going to be there, and I think that's intriguing. We already self-limit. Again, the size of our industry within world of transportation is only about 7% of us,
right?
Out of all the people who take buses and fly on planes and drive cars and blah, 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 there's like 7% of us who ride motorcycle or have a motorcycle license, right? And participate at some degree in motorcycling. That's small. It's already self-limiting. So, if we trying to say to ourselves that the goal is to get every person on the, within a community to ride a motorcycle, it's like, that's ridiculous. If we could just get from 7 to 9%, we'd be in great shape.
Yep.
I mean, just that small incremental uplift in sales would have senior executives bouncing off the walls in joy.
Right.
And all we have to do, if all of us who are already motorcyclists make it a mission to convert one person to explore motorcycling and get into riding every 2 years, then then we've done that.
Yep.
If you, as an individual, Bruce, were to turn around to 3 of your friends and all 4 of you donate $500 each, you can sponsor your local elementary school with an all kids bike program that lasts for 5 years. That $4,000 equals 5 years of a program. And 100% of the boys and girls and black kids and Native American kids and rich kids and poor kids, 100% of them are going to learn how to ride and balance on 2 wheels in that program. So we can affect this better than anybody else. There's no solution that's going to come from OEMs. It's really up to us as individual riders, and the opportunity to communicate that and participate in that has never been better.
Yep. That is definitely true. And I guess, for me, the little kind of, philosophical journey that I'm on with this episode is to sort of look for the answer to the question, why should everyone else be happy about that? If motorcycle sales, if the number of people in our world who ride motorcycles increases by that proportion, from 7 to 9% in your example, why should the rest of the population think that, that's good news? And I guess I can think of a few reasons. So let me ask you, imagine that it's, 20 years from now and some non-motorcycle riding person is reading their iPhone on their way to work in their self-driving car, and they look up and they see a motorcycle go by. What are they going to be thinking when they look at that rider?
Well, they're either going to think that person's completely insane, or they're going to be unbelievably jealous.
Same as now.
So, it's right. It's going to be, shades of that. And so again, categorically speaking, if that person looks out the window and they're on the side of where they have that inkling of, man, I could do that. And then the industry slogan of, let's go ride, or whatever, that's lame, but whatever it would be, right? Like pops up in their head, then now we've won. We're winning at that point.
Right.
And so that person, as you project 20 years from now, is going to be, if I'm successful with All Kids Bike and the All Kids Bike program is successful, there will be millions of people who already know how to ride and balance on 2 wheels, by the time they're 11. So 48 million children in America who are underneath 11 years old today all knew how to ride and balance on 2 wheels. Then that 5 to 7%, that's the natural number, is going to flow into licensed drivers starting as little as 5 years when they turn 16. And then, motorcycle sales or dirt bike sales and OSETs and, whatever, PW50s and all the other stuff that's already out there, that's going to get going. And family riding is going to get going. So it's not hard to imagine that a huge part of society is going to become more insulated. Idiocracy was way before its time, right?
Yeah.
And that animated movie WALL-E, touches on those points as well. Is that we're just going to get fat and lazy, and we're going to be sitting on our Barca loungers, crapping in them, and that's going to be our world. But I really think that for people who are into motorcycling, these are, that sense of exploration, that sense of self-control, that sense of adventure is baked into us in a compelling manner. And it's not 100% of the population, but it could be 9. Mm-hmm. It could be 10. And that's where we win.
Yep. And it feels somehow as though we would all be better off for that. It's funny. So I just bang away a little bit longer on this question of what do people see when they look out the windows of their cars. I'll stipulate that I'm a pretty well-behaved rider and I have pretty quiet bikes. And I'll stipulate that I ride in a rural area or in small towns. So those are particular guardrails on this. But I find almost universally people connect as I'm going by, and they will wave, or kids will wave, or you'll just get a nod from, some guy pushing a baby carriage, or somebody will wave you through a stop sign, even though it's not your turn. And, the list goes on. And I love that, but I often wonder, what do they see? What makes them be so nice to me when they're clearly not very nice to each other? And whatever that is, it seems like what we need to bottle. Do you have that experience, and does it resonate for you?
Yeah, totally. I had that experience, and I think it's curiosity. It's just it's animal curiosity. We want to see what that other guy's doing. I mean, when I I see a guy on a unicycle, I'm like, I gotta watch this. I don't know how that's happening, and then months and months and years later, I find myself on Amazon buying a unicycle, which is sitting safely in my garage. And, and I'm like, so what, that bug was in my head, right? I'm 53 years old. My collarbones are as fragile as uncooked, spaghetti. What the hell am I doing buying a unicycle? Right. And so, because of that self-exploration and that self, like, sort of awareness that we are beings in a compellingly, mobile world. And I think that's not going to go away. And again, if we were to just like take a breath as an industry and come together and have more conversations like this that get you thinking and have you come up with what's an interesting way that I can bring motorcycling into my local high school, or I can connect with the motorcycle cops in town and have them help me get into the local high school. How can I do that? And those little thoughts are, if you're a property owner, to take that one weird triangular, space in your parking lot that you own, and then just simply stencil motorcycle parking. MIC should be sending out motorcycle parking stencils for free to anybody who wants one.
Right.
To spray paint on there. Right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Right. And so that it's those little things that just sort of plant in your head. And the more we do that, the more we promote, like, it was revealed that Ewan and Charlie are doing their long way up on the Harley live wires. I don't know if you saw that or not. Like in the last couple of days.
The internet blew up.
So that's, that's interesting. Those guys, they're compelling individuals. They feel like buddies you want to hang out with and have a beer and tell lies and stories with, and now they're doing it on an electric bike. So kudos to Harley for that. Right. For facilitating that.
Yep.
I hope that that's as authentic as possible, that it's not this unrealistic thing where there's like a semi truck full of generators dragging, like right behind them. And, I don't think that those guys would do that, but I hope not. Man, that would be really bummed if I saw that in like some drone shot and there's like a truck with a bunch of Miller generators on the back or something. But anyway, I think that we can continue to plant the seeds of motorcycling in a vast population. And I think that, again, it's that, how do we get from 7 to 9%?
Yep.
And it's just by being kind, being approachable, bringing people who might appreciate art but don't know about motorcycling, bringing them to the hand-built show. Just as the Guggenheim pounded their chest about being the brand, being the show that elevated motorcycling to art because it recognized it as that. We can go the other way, and we can be a generation of people and riders who recognize motorcycling as approachable, and introduce people to motorcycling in that way.
Yeah.
And so I really, it's on us. It's on us to fail or not. It is 100% on individual riders to be able to do that, and then the rest of the industry will follow along.
Yeah. I think that's right. And so I was going to ask you, but I feel maybe you've covered this, but I'll give you a chance to add to it if you are so moved. The question of how riders can sort of help make this happen, I feel like, and I feel like the social media has made this a little bit worse. I feel like there are corners of our community where people take themselves entirely too seriously, where you see people riding motorcycles of one kind or another, looking as if they're escorting a presidential motorcade, there's a bit of tribalism around the edges of this, of this sport that is exclusionary. There's some. Like any community, we have, there are malcontents, and we have, some bad behaviors. We don't make ourselves kind of conscious of the impact those behaviors have. Do you think, so this is all a long way of sort of asking the question, do you think we need to make sure that everybody knows we're enjoying ourselves and be a little bit more communitarian about that? I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is yes. I think, finding our own individual way of doing that is, it's not a religion. This is supposed to be fun, and it really is. And when you go to Asia and you just see the volumes and volumes of small displacement motorcycles and scooters, and that's the they didn't build a subway system in some of these old Chinese cities, right? So that's how everybody gets around, and
right.
It's as common as a toaster. We're in North America. We're in a unique place where motorcycling is an optional activity. It's one that is inherently unstable. It is one that pushes against the trends of enclosure and cocooning your life. So those of us who choose to participate in that are the ones who will draw the next generation of riders in. And just going back to Mann's Chinese Theater and me sitting in the back of that station wagon and seeing that Harley and looking at everything vibrating, and then looking up, and that biker guy was like staring right into my eyes, and he could just see that he had me, and he gave me he had this black beard, and he gave me this big old toothy grin, and like blipped his throttle a little bit and gave me a thumbs up. And it's like that one moment. I mean, it's like, it's so, I actually wrote that story up in a magazine. That one moment is so part of me. And all he had to do was smile and give me a thumbs up. And it's just so we can do that on a daily basis. We can have fun. We don't have to take it seriously. You only get one run in this life. And, and the more people we can share our enjoyment of motorcycling, the more we'll be intrigued. And in 10 years' time, when that now 30-year-old, then 40-year-old looks up from his phone and sees a motorcycle drive by from his, self-driving cocoon, he's going to realize that, yeah, maybe Monday through Friday I'm in the cocoon, but man, come Saturday, I got to get out of this thing. And that's the easiest, most approachable way to do it.
Yep, that's just about perfect. I'm crossing off questions here. I think that's right. I was thinking as you were talking that the listeners to this podcast are pretty generous spirited people, if the correspondence is any indication, but I could still imagine people saying, why should I care? This is personal for me and I do it for my own reasons. But I think there is an inherent joy in letting people know how much pleasure it gives you, and that seems to me a common good all by itself. That guy changed your life, right?
That's it. There was a sense of, it's not the sense of he was better than me, but it was a sense of he was having more fun than me.
Right.
And, the quickest way to create action is like a little bit of jealousy. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I want to be that guy.
Perfect.
I mean, you're in marketing. How many advertising campaigns have banked on, oh man, I want to be that guy?
Yeah, all of them.
Or gal or whatever, and all of it. That's what you do, right? So that's it. It's just that simple. Just be nice. It sounds so stutid, but it's true. Just be nice. If someone has a question about your bike, answer it. Don't assume they know everything, and don't assume everybody wants to ride a farkled out GS or a chromed out Harley. I mean, everyone's got you gotta ladder your way up, and for some people their ladder is a step stool, and we got to be just as happy with the fact that they got on the step stool as we are that we climbed up to the top of our ladder.
Yeah, wherever that ended up being. Robert, this has been a great conversation. I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate your time, as I always do with the people who do this for me. But I also appreciate your thoughtful answers. You've obviously reflected on this, and I think that's fantastic. You're setting a great example for what you're talking about here. I hope you'll keep fighting the good fight.
Well, I appreciate it, and I know that there's a lot of time and effort in what you do, and sometimes when you divide that against the number of people who may listen to a particular episode, it might not feel like it, but it's worth it. And if we as enthusiasts don't take charge on this thing, then then it's that many fewer people that are going to get to share the joy that we might take for granted. So yeah. I hope people come out to the motorcycle shows. I'll throw my plug in. It's just go to motorcycleshows.com, and that's got the list of the 8 different shows that we're going to be at. And then please come visit me at Discover the Ride. I'm planning on being at all the shows. And last year we trained over close to 7,000, I think it was, wow, new riders on those bikes. And there's no other program that's going to deliver as many potential new riders to the doorsteps of OEMs than Discover the Ride this coming winter season. So I really hope that people come out and visit us at the international motorcycle shows, and then take the time to log on to allkidsbike.org and see how easy it is to change the fortunes of an entire generation.
That sounds like a worthy goal. I will make sure that there are links in the show notes for people who actually want to go and do that. And hopefully I'll do that at some point and we can shake hands for real.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Let me know.
Will do. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your season and ride safe, and good luck with all this.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the time.
The morning after I spoke with Robert, the shop called to say that my Triumph was finally back in one piece and ready to pick up. And so, to celebrate, I decided to try an experiment. I gave the Scrambler a quick wipe down and a shine, pulled on some jaunty vintage racing leathers that I bought on impulse from a guy on the internet for $350. Tell me you could resist that. And hit the road, determined to be an extrovert for a change. The idea was to turn the ride inside out, so to speak, connect with everyone I could, and let people in on how it felt to be out there, regardless of the risk to my dignity or my imagined coolness. Mostly this was nonverbal, and it depended heavily on waving and nodding and blipping my throttle for kids on bicycles, but still, for me, this was pretty outgoing. And for the next few hours, the world was a noticeably sunnier place. Well, I'll spare you the list of anecdotes, but by the time that truck driver pulled over onto a gravel shoulder with a wave just to let me pass, I realized that maybe Robert Pandya was onto something. When we don't take ourselves quite so seriously and let the rest of the world know what a good time we're having, it doesn't just improve our days, it seems to improve theirs too. On some level, motorcycles matter because they're symbols. Humans keep symbols around to remind them of what's important. And curator Thomas Krenz proposed a list of the things that a motorcycle can symbolize. You'll remember: technology, engineering, innovation, design, mobility, speed, rebellion, desire, freedom, love, sex, and death. Without motorcycles, I guess people would be reminded a little less often of their own humanity, and that there are good things about that, however messy and irrational it can be. In some small way, we carry that torch. But all that just comes with the fact of being on a bike. Where we make the biggest difference, I think, is in letting the world know how we feel about it. When that person looks up from their iPhone in their self-driving car someday to watch a motorcycle go by, the one thing I'm pretty sure, and hope, they're still going to think is, that person is happy. And for just a moment, that happiness might be contagious. In the scheme of things, maybe the answer to why motorcycles matter is as simple as that. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, and I'll include links to the advocacy initiatives that Robert talked about. It's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and every email gets an answer. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street, and where you can follow a lot of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Robert Pandya. This episode's playlist recommendation features yet another motorcycle riding musician. There just seems to be something about guitars and bikes. Kyler Morrison calls Ashland, Ohio home, and we connected on Instagram because he's a listener to this podcast. This is Kyler Morrison Band's latest single, No Drugs. It's about being happy, and I think this folky groove makes a pretty good soundtrack for those laid-back autumn rides. Buy it wherever you like to get your music, and in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
I was once a younger man, and I was chasing down the second hand. And now I watch the hours as they endlessly devour all my plans. I thought my bike would make me fast, thought a drink would make me laugh, but I was wrong. And no matter what I do, when I'm wearing out my boots, I want the future, I want the past on the dirty second hand. I got no drugs, I got no drugs to make me wiser, but I got a love, oh I got a love as sweet as anyone could ask. That's my pass to the dirty second hand.